Welcome back. We're looking at the political crossroads which face Bolivians and their president Evo Morales. And during the discussing the issue, we have with us Jaime Aparicio, the former Bolivian ambassador to the U.S., now the vice president of the Inter-American Juridical Committee, an agency of the Organization of American States. We also have John Perkins, an activist and author who describes himself as a former economic hitman for the Western powers. Now, actually, it was interesting. Before the break, we were talking about the relationship between the U.S. and Bolivia. And John, you were saying, in fact, again, we were pointing out or chatting in the break that basically it's not that an important relationship anymore in Latin America, that it's blown out of proportion.
Yeah, well, you know, I just came back from Nicaragua and Ecuador and Bolivia and a number, Costa Rica, a number of other countries, and I was meeting with presidents in those countries or their staffs, and time again I heard, we don't want your foreign aid, we don't need your foreign aid, we have our own resources. What we want is to do away with these free trade agreements and many of the other agreements that basically allow multinational corporations to come in and plunder. We don't want these IMF conditions that require that we privatize our utility companies and so on. We want autonomy, and we don't need your money. We've got our resources. We just need to be able to use our resources to help our poor people, to allow them to bring themselves up by their bootstraps. And yes, foreign aid, and I think foreign aid has been irrelevant for some time, but it's been used to help our own corporations. So big loans from the World Bank or the AID or whoever often never went to Bolivia or Ecuador or any of the other countries. It went to U.S. or multinational corporations to build power plants, to build industrial parks, things that might benefit a few rich people in those countries, but didn't help the majority of the people at all.
The ambassador had said before the break that the issue of the coca for cocaine was not so big for Bolivia now because of the different routes it takes through Latin America. But I wonder, for the coca growers, what are the options in terms of they still have to make a livelihood somehow? So if there is an effort to try to eradicate that coca production, what are the alternatives?
Well, you know, and from my perspective, and speaking to some of these people, the coca growers over the years, you know, this is an age-old tradition, and coca is actually a sacred plant to these people. It's been used throughout history, not the way we use it as an addictive drug, but as something to cut back on hunger, as a sacred plant. It's been used in many ways, and so to tell them they can't grow it anymore is first very imperialistic. And then, of course, as the ambassador pointed out, the coca today primarily goes through Brazil into Europe. It's not really an American issue, but it's an excuse. And politicians in this country, if you raise the cocaine flag, suddenly everybody's reacting. It's a little bit like we do something similar in Colombia with this, whereas actually most of the money is spent to help our oil companies, to protect oil companies, but we talk about how it's being used to eradicate drugs. It's a political ploy.
Ambassador, if countries like Bolivia can say, look, we don't need Western or multinational corporations coming in and plundering our resources, we can handle them ourselves. How has Bolivia fared under Evo Morales' move to nationalize the resources, the energy resources?
Well, the first thing, because it's very common to hear that he nationalized, is he didn't nationalize the industries because he couldn't. And also because one of the major players in Bolivia is Brazil, and as you know, President Lula is very close to, he was a few days ago in Bolivia supporting him. So Petrobras, that it's now a transnational, also is very powerful in Bolivia, so there was no nationalization. What's happening is, and that's the biggest problem for Bolivia at this point, is that the state company that was now recreated, and they want to make it stronger, has no any possibility of investment. And as you know, in energy sector is an intensive financial investment industry. And by this year, we won't be able to sell to Argentina, according to our commitments. So Argentina is going to buy LNG from Trinidad and Tobago because Bolivia is no longer a supplier, a reliable supplier. We have to sell to Brazil because we have a contract with Brazil, so all our gas is going to Brazil, but the industry is in urgent need of investment. And they need investment, and that's the struggle now. Venezuela has offered to put some money there. We will see what happens with that. That's a very difficult thing because that's a state corporation that will invest in another state corporation, but what I can tell you is the lack of investment is hurting the most important industry in Bolivia at this point.
Yusuf's on the line from Nigeria. Yusuf, what would you like to ask?
Greetings, everybody. I just want to know how is it that these countries that invest in our own countries, I'm from Nigeria, we sit on so much wealth. It doesn't benefit much of the population. And Mr. Perkins just alluded to how things are done.
Okay.
How would we go about changing the way and manner we do business?
Okay, Yusuf, let's get a perspective from John Perkins on this. Then it's something that's reflected, of course, beyond Bolivia, but which is what Yusuf is pointing out. But countries with resources, and yet somehow the people remain so poor. How can business be changed?
Well, it's a terrible crime. I mean, that there is this form of imperialism, colonialism that we don't label as that these days, but that's what he's talking about. And in Nigeria, it's very strong. The big multinational oil companies have a huge stranglehold on Nigeria. You know, the way to overcome it is by bringing in leaders, presidents who will stand up to that. And that is exactly what's happening throughout South America. 9 countries in South America that are moving in that direction, Bolivia being a prime example, and Venezuela another example. Nigeria really needs to do that, to somehow vote in leaders who will stand up. And if the whole continent of Africa can combine, if Congo and Sudan and many other nations can come together, that is the best protection. I think we're moving into a world that's beginning to understand that this has been this very subtle form of imperialism. It's not the old form where militaries went in. It was obvious. It's much more subtle, but it's every bit as brutal.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, actually, and actually, John, perhaps get your perspective first on this. The referendum that Evo Morales has called on August the 10th, I mean, is it basically simply a power show against the governors who are opposing him?
Well, probably the ambassador could answer that better than I, but from my perspective, it looks to me like he's standing out there and saying, choose, you know, let's see what happens. And I think this is magnificent. In this country, the ambassador talked about the idea of nationalization. We spread that word around that Morales is nationalizing our industries, which he's not doing. We also spread the word around that he's a dictator or that Chavez is a dictator. They're not. They're democratically elected. And this referendum, I think, is part of a very democratic process.
And Ambassador, I wanted to get your perspective, what you expect to happen if this all goes through on August 10th.
The problem with the referendum is that it's not going to change anything in Bolivia, and it's going to make things worse. And I will explain you why. Because this referendum is not only to recall the president or to maintain the president, it's also to recall or maintain the governors of Bolivia. 8 of the 9 departments of Bolivia are going to vote. The question is, do you agree that the president should stay, and you agree with his policies, and you agree? So probably people is going to vote in favor of that, because he needs, in order to be recalled, he needs to have 54% of the votes against him. And because he has a large support in the highlands, it's probably that he's going to have that or a little bit more than that support. The problem is that 5 of the governors of the opposition that were also elected are going to be voted in probably the same terms. And they are going to say, yes, we support you, we support your policies, and we support how you are standing against President Morales. So you will have a president that is receiving a new mandate for the next 2 years, a very strong mandate, and you would have the governors receiving the same kind of mandate. So if the president decides to approve the constitution that he's waiting for this referendum to approve, these provinces like Santa Cruz are going to say, okay, but this constitution would not apply in Santa Cruz because my people voted in favor of my opposition to your constitution. So I think that at short term, things are going to be worse. And to make it worse, the Constitutional Tribunal, who was dismantled by President Morales because was, part of his way to approve a constitution, has declared this illegal. And the Electoral Court has decided to continue this election. So there are many problems. I don't see any solution at this moment.
Well, gentlemen, I thank you very much. Of course, so many more questions, never enough time, but I thank you very much, Ambassador. And John Perkins, good to have you back as well.
Likewise.
And thank you for being with us. On the next show, we look at America's image on the global stage. Has it lost its place as a nation focused on fairness for all? We'll see you next time.